I'm Sarah, 30 years old, and I want to unveil a past I concealed for a long time due to its painful and difficult nature. Life often surprises us with events we never anticipated, yet they still occur and upend everything. I never thought I'd endure anguish because of a truth I still struggle to accept. My story isn't about love or family bliss, as many assume. Rather, it revolves around sacrifices and hidden emotions. People often claim that love is the foundation of marriage, but in the case of my mother and stepfather, I knew from the beginning that wasn't true. The moment he appeared, I sensed something was off. Gradually, I realized that my mother was merely an excuse. I was the true reason he married her. Ensure you subscribe to my channel for more captivating true stories like this one. Watch this video until the end, as it will be incredibly intriguing. My mother, Amir, owned a quaint boutique after my father's passing when I was young. She raised and cared for me until I reached adulthood. With her strength and determination, she not only managed our lives but also turned her fashion store into a beloved community spot. To me, my mother epitomized strength and independence. Life proceeded steadily and peacefully as she worked tirelessly at the boutique while I concentrated on my studies. As time progressed, I transitioned into a new phase when I began university. For the first time, I felt I had truly stepped out of my mother's protective embrace and into the broader world. The initial days of university introduced me to new experiences, and one day, I encountered Mr. Ethan, who was not only my teacher, but later became my stepfather. Mr. Ethan was a philosophy lecturer, and from the first lesson, his teaching style fascinated me. He helped me gain profound insights into the subject and altered my perspective on life. Our after-class discussions became frequent, and I soon recognized his significant influence on me. However, I gradually detected something strange in his gaze. Initially, I thought I was imagining things, but over time, the feeling became more evident. When I spoke, he looked at me not just as a teacher would at a student, but with a deeper, silent intimacy filled with hidden meanings. This gaze made me uncomfortable. I felt confused, as it wasn't the usual look of respect and professionalism. Instead, it seemed like he expected something I couldn't comprehend. I questioned whether I was overthinking, but the discomfort was undeniable. As time went on, I noticed not only his eyes, but also his actions. Whenever I spoke or walked by, he tried to stand closer to me, occasionally placing his hand on my shoulder in a way that made me uneasy. At first, these gestures seemed harmless, but they grew heavier and more uncomfortable. One time, he kept me after class to discuss the lecture, but the conversation veered away from the subject. That unnecessary intimacy made me feel suffocated. I no longer sensed the respect and distance that should exist between a teacher and student. Gradually, I avoided him. I fabricated excuses to skip private conversations after school. When he offered help, I declined, claiming I was busy. But deep down, I simply wanted to maintain my distance. I sat farther away in class, limited eye contact, and sometimes arrived late to avoid seeing him before class. I believed that by avoiding Mr. Ethan, everything would be fine. If I didn't face those strange looks and actions, perhaps I could suppress the anxiety within me. For the rest of the school year, I successfully avoided him, and everything seemed to return to normal. However, I never expected that the safety I built for myself would be temporary. After a year, when I returned home, I noticed a change in my mother. She was more cheerful than usual, her eyes sparkling with quiet joy. I became curious, but she simply said she was happy because life was improving. One afternoon, as we sat in the living room, she revealed that she had met someone special and wanted to introduce him to me. Seeing her joy, my heart felt lighter. For years, she had raised me alone, sacrificing her happiness to care for me. I was relieved that she had finally found joy. On the day of the introduction, my mother meticulously arranged the house and set the dining table with care. Her excitement and joy were palpable, and I hoped this man would bring her the happiness she long sought. When the doorbell rang, my heart fluttered. My mother hurried to open the door while I waited in the living room, imagining the man who would enter her life. When the door opened and I saw Mr. Ethan step in, I was overwhelmed with indescribable shock. I stood there, unable to believe my eyes. All the unease I felt about him surged back, engulfing me. The man my mother loved, whom she introduced with such trust and happiness, was the very man I had been avoiding. My mind exploded with conflicting thoughts. Why him? When did they meet? Did he have ulterior motives? The anxiety in my heart intensified as memories of his unsettling glances and actions flooded back. I looked at my mother, hoping she sensed the strangeness of the situation, but she remained blissfully unaware, smiling and introducing Ethan as if everything was perfectly fine. Mr. Ethan entered with a calm, friendly smile, greeting me and pretending to be surprised that I was my mother's daughter. I tried to act equally surprised, but inside I was in turmoil. My mother, innocent and oblivious to my distress, laughed and was thrilled to discover that Ethan was my teacher. The two of them chatted happily about the unexpected coincidence while I stood there, feeling a creeping sense of insecurity. I couldn't stop questioning who Mr. Ethan truly was and why he appeared in my mother's life in a completely different role than I knew him to be. Was this really a coincidence, or was something hidden beneath the surface? From that moment forward, my vision was clouded, and life proceeded as if nothing unusual had happened. There were no peculiar actions from Ethan that raised alarm, and my mother and he grew increasingly attached, their bond appearing genuine. I observed my mother in a state of joy I had never seen before. Her face lit up with smiles and radiance daily. Before long, she chose to remarry, and Ethan officially became my stepfather. Everything unfolded without incident, and our family life remained tranquil and stable. Over time, with no odd occurrences, I began to believe I had been overthinking. Perhaps my initial concerns stemmed from the stress of adjusting to the changes in my mother's life and my own. Witnessing her happiness, I gradually dismissed my doubts and fears. Observing her beaming alongside Ethan, I came to accept their union and wholeheartedly offered my blessing. I wished for her enduring joy and learned to welcome Ethan into our family. As the days turned into months, I found no trace of the unsettling behavior I once suspected in Ethan. I eventually reproached myself for allowing baseless worries to affect me. My mother's increasing happiness with Ethan brought me relief. At last, I felt content for my mother and sincerely wished her a life filled with joy. At that point, I believed life would continue peacefully. A significant period had passed without any unusual signs from Ethan, and I gradually relaxed. I no longer harbored suspicions or doubts about him, as he had shown himself to be a caring and devoted husband to my mother. I genuinely thought my prior concerns were merely the product of my imagination. At 22, I graduated from university and embarked on the search for my first job. Despite not finding a suitable position immediately, I chose to assist my mother at her boutique. We spent more quality time together, and Ethan frequently visited the store, lending a hand with minor tasks during his free time. Life remained smooth, and I no longer harbored doubts about Ethan. I sincerely believed he was a good husband to my mother and had become an integral part of my life. However, on what would become the darkest day of my life, everything changed. That day, I fell ill, my body weakened by a fever, preventing me from accompanying my mother to the store. She urged me to stay home and rest, which I did without a second thought. Only Ethan remained at home with me, as he had no obligations that day. Initially, I felt no concern or suspicion. After years of cohabitation, I trusted him as a kind-hearted individual who genuinely loved my mother. I lay in my room, hoping sleep would ease the pain and fatigue caused by the fever. However, my peace was short-lived. The unthinkable transpired within the walls I once deemed the safest place. Ethan entered my room carrying a glass of water and some pills, claiming they were painkillers to reduce my fever. His voice was gentle and reassuring, devoid of any red flags. With my head spinning from the fever, I accepted the pills without hesitation, eager for relief. I drank the water, unaware that this marked the beginning of a nightmare. At first, everything seemed ordinary. The medicine didn't work immediately, and I remained fully conscious of my surroundings. I lay quietly, expecting the fever to subside. Yet, after roughly 20 minutes, things took a sinister turn. Ethan re-entered the room, this time empty-handed. His eyes carried an unsettling expression, and when I attempted to sit up, I discovered to my horror that I was completely paralyzed. A chilling numbness spread through me, draining all my strength. Panic surged within me as I lay helpless, eyes wide in terror while Ethan drew closer. Ethan's face remained calm, but his eyes gleamed with a malevolence that sent shivers down my spine. I struggled to move, but my body refused to obey. My helplessness escalated as he leaned in, his face mere inches from mine, and smiled coldly. In a soft yet clear voice, he whispered, "I've waited for this moment for so long." I was overcome with dread, unable to fathom what was happening. My mind raced to make sense of the situation, but everything crumbled before me. The suspicions I once dismissed as paranoia now manifested as a horrifying reality. Ethan sat beside me, his eyes calculating and his smile sinister. I lay defenseless, forced to listen as he revealed a shocking truth. Ethan confessed that from the moment I entered college, he had harbored feelings for me and sought to grow closer. My persistent avoidance led him to take an alternative route to infiltrate my life. Delving into my personal history, he discovered my family situation and decided the only way to reach me was through my mother. Gradually, he gained her trust and seamlessly integrated into our family. As I absorbed his words, despair engulfed me. I couldn't fathom that the happiness my mother experienced was merely a facade, a meticulously crafted plan to get closer to me. The realization filled me with anguish and disgust. When Ethan finished speaking, he moved nearer, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction as he observed my immobilized form. I felt utterly powerless as he came closer. His eyes, once gentle as my mother had described, now appeared cold and greedy. I attempted to retreat, but my body refused to obey. Every effort felt futile. My heart pounded, yet I was frozen, unable to move. Ethan leaned in, his hands moving over me, bringing a wave of revulsion I couldn't escape. He took complete control of my body, showing no mercy. I lay there, paralyzed, enduring every second he stole from me. Time stretched endlessly, and all I could do was wish for it to stop. But he didn't. The world around me seemed to crumble. Everyone I knew felt torn away by his actions. I wanted to resist, to fight back, but it was useless. Ethan continued, and my body no longer felt like my own. Each passing moment became a never-ending nightmare. I lay helpless, staring at the ceiling, trying to escape the reality unfolding slowly and painfully. The loss of control, the paralysis, fueled my rising fear with every second, every minute, every touch. His every move, every contact, felt like a strike against my self-worth and dignity. Pieces of me broke apart, and I couldn't stop it. My body no longer felt like mine. He had taken complete command. Everything happened in slow motion, and I could only lie there, consumed by terror, unable to fight back. Each moment felt like hours, and I desperately wished for it to end. When it was over, I lay there, empty and numb. The room felt cold, oppressive, and lifeless. Ethan stood, adjusting his clothes as if nothing had happened, while I remained motionless, trapped in the horror I had just endured. My entire world seemed to collapse. Everything I knew and believed in lost its meaning. My mind was flooded with painful, angry questions. I couldn't comprehend why this had happened. How could someone my mother loved, someone I had tried to accept as family, do this to me? Pain, fear, and betrayal intertwined, suffocating me, leaving only helplessness and despair. Ethan glanced at me one last time, his eyes cold and unfeeling, before leaving the room, abandoning me to my pain, torment, and the growing obsession in my mind. I didn't know how to face this reality or how to move forward when everything felt shattered. As the effects of the drug slowly faded, I began to regain control of my body, though I was still weak and dizzy. I tried to stand, each movement agonizing, but I knew what I had to do. My hands shook as I straightened my clothes, trying to hide the evidence of the horror I had just faced. My eyes landed on the phone on the table. It was my only way to call for help, to end this nightmare. With unsteady steps, I approached it, my hands trembling as I picked it up. I dialed 911, each number feeling heavier than the last. When the operator answered, I took a deep breath, struggling to keep my voice steady, and explained everything. The police arrived quickly, though though it felt like an eternity. When they entered, the silence broke, replaced by voices and hurried footsteps. Ethan was arrested without resistance, his head bowed as if he knew it was over. My mother returned shortly after the police took Ethan away. She found me trembling and weak, standing beside the officers. At first, she didn't understand what had happened. I looked into her eyes and all my strength vanished. I couldn't hold back anymore. Tears streamed down my face as I told her everything. My voice broke as I revealed the truth about Ethan, what he had done, and the horror I had endured. My mother was stunned, her eyes wide with confusion and pain. She didn't speak as I recounted the events, standing as if her world had fallen apart. When I finished, she collapsed, sobbing in grief and regret. She blamed herself for not seeing the signs, for bringing someone like Ethan into our lives. Over and over, she repeated, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry." But I knew no apology could undo the pain we were feeling. That day changed everything forever. My mother could never forgive herself, and I could never return to the life I had before. After Ethan's arrest, I felt some relief, but the pain didn't fade immediately. I had sought justice, faced what he had done bravely, but the haunting memories remained. My mother, after hearing the full truth, sank into deep remorse. She couldn't stop blaming herself for letting Ethan into our lives and failing to see his true nature. She decided to leave our home and close the boutique for a while to find peace. Ethan was convicted, and I knew I would never see him again, but that didn't heal the wounds in my heart. He had destroyed a part of my life, and no matter how much time passed, the pain lingered like a scar that would never fade. From this horrific experience, I learned that silence is never the answer to pain or fear. Facing the truth, no matter how painful, is the only way to find peace. Silence and hiding only prolong the suffering and consume you. I also realized that even though my mother hadn't known what was happening, her trust in Ethan and in me led to devastating consequences. Sharing feelings and thoughts with loved ones is crucial. If I had spoken up when I sensed something was wrong with Ethan, perhaps things wouldn't have reached this point. Though Ethan was punished and my mother acknowledged her mistake, the scars remained. Our existence did not revert to its former state. I had to adapt to the agony and the lingering memories of the past while seeking solace from wounds that are hard to mend. As for my mother, she too had to learn to pardon herself. Everything is still unfolding, and I cannot predict what the future holds. However, one thing is certain: I will no longer remain silent. I will keep moving forward no matter how tough the path may be. The sorrow and remorse will continue to shadow me, but I am aware that I have embarked on the road to recovery. Although the journey is lengthy and arduous, I refuse to be a prisoner of silence. I will rediscover myself and regain the strength that was taken from me during that horrific ordeal.